John C. Maxwell's No Limits opens with a simple but quietly radical idea: the biggest limits in your life are rarely external. They're almost always internal agreements you've made, about who you are, what you deserve, and what's realistic for you. Maxwell frames capacity not as talent or intelligence, but as the ceiling you believe exists. From the start, the book invites you to question whether the walls around your potential are actually solid, or just familiar. The core story of the book unfolds around the difference between growth and stagnation. Maxwell describes people who appear stuck not because they lack opportunity, but because they've stopped stretching. Capacity expands only when it's challenged, and comfort is often the enemy disguised as safety. He urges the reader to see discomfort not as a warning sign, but as evidence that growth is happening. One of the most actionable themes is intentional growth. Maxwell argues that growth is never automatic, time passing does not equal progress. He tells stories of people who assume experience alone will make them better, only to plateau for years. The shift happens when you decide to grow on purpose, setting expectations for yourself that are slightly beyond your current abilities and then showing up daily to meet them. Belief plays a starring role throughout the book. Maxwell explains that belief doesn't create skill out of thin air, but it determines whether skill is developed or abandoned. When you believe your capacity is fixed, you stop trying early. When you believe it's expandable, you tolerate failure longer. The practical takeaway is to audit your inner language and remove phrases that quietly cap your effort, replacing them with questions like, what would growth require here? Maxwell also emphasizes the power of environment. He shares stories of people who dramatically expanded their capacity simply by changing who they listened to and spent time with. Growth accelerates when you're around people who expect more from themselves and from you. The action here is deliberate proximity. Seek mentors, peers, and inputs that normalize expansion rather than reinforce limitation. Another strong thread is discipline over motivation. Maxwell makes the case that motivation is unreliable, but discipline compounds. He illustrates how small daily actions, when consistently applied, raise your capacity almost invisibly until one day you realize you're operating at a level that once felt impossible. The lesson is to design routines that support growth even on days when enthusiasm is absent. Failure is reframed not as evidence of inadequacy but as feedback. Maxwell tells stories of leaders who failed repeatedly but used each setback to refine their approach. Capacity grows when you extract lessons instead of shame from mistakes. Practically, this means reviewing failures with curiosity, asking what they reveal about gaps in skill, preparation, or thinking, rather than what they say about your worth. The book spends meaningful time on self-leadership. Maxwell argues that you cannot expand your external influence beyond your internal control. Managing your time, emotions, and focus increases capacity because it reduces wasted energy. The actionable insight is to treat your attention as a finite resource and protect it aggressively from distractions that drain growth potential. Maxwell also explores the idea of intentional stretching. He encourages readers to regularly do things they're not yet qualified to do, as long as they're willing to learn fast. Growth rarely happens inside perfectly mastered territory. The practical move is to volunteer for responsibilities that scare you slightly and then close the skill gap through learning and practice. Another important narrative centers on consistency over intensity. Maxwell shows that dramatic bursts of effort followed by burnout don't expand capacity long-term. Sustainable growth comes from steady, repeatable actions. This reframes success as something built quietly, not something achieved through heroic but unsustainable pushes. The book highlights the danger of comparison. Maxwell explains that measuring yourself against others can either inflate ego or crush confidence, both of which limit growth. Capacity expands best when you measure yourself against your past self. The actionable takeaway is to track personal progress rather than external rankings, focusing on becoming incrementally better than you were before. Maxwell also addresses fear directly. Fear of failure, fear of criticism, and fear of success all quietly shrink capacity by encouraging safe choices. He shares stories of people who learned to act while afraid, discovering that courage grows through action, not reflection. The practical lesson is to stop waiting for fear to disappear and instead move forward with it present. The book weaves in the importance of purpose. Maxwell suggests that capacity expands fastest when your growth serves something beyond yourself. When your effort benefits others, you tolerate discomfort longer and push through resistance more effectively. The action here is to connect your personal growth goals to the impact they allow you to have on people around you. Toward the end, Maxwell emphasizes reflection as a growth accelerator. Experience alone doesn't expand capacity, evaluated experience does. He encourages regular reflection on what worked, what didn't, and what needs adjustment. This practice turns everyday life into a training ground rather than a routine loop.